Hi everyone, and welcome to Books, Blankets, and Brews. I'm Lala, your host and fellow book lover, and I'm thrilled to have you join me for our very first episode. If you're someone who loves getting lost in incredible stories and analyzing every detail, this podcast is for you. For our first book, we're diving into Sarah J. Maas's Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood. This book is a roller coaster of emotions filled with magic, mystery, romance, and some of the most unforgivable characters you'll ever meet. Today, we're starting with chapters 1 and 2. If you haven't read them yet, don't worry. I'll give you a spoiler-free recap before we dig into the details. But I highly recommend reading along because this book is packed with moments you won't want to miss. Alright, let's jump into Crescent City. Before we get into the story, let's quickly set the stage. Crescent City is Maas's first adult fantasy novel, and it blends a modern urban setting with ancient magic. It follows Bryce Quinlan, a half-human, half-fae, living in a bustling city filled with angels, fae, werewolves, and demons. At its core, this is a story about love, loss, and resilience, but it's also a murder mystery, a romance, and an action-packed adventure. In other words, it's got something for everyone. Now, let's dive into chapters 1 and 2. Part 1. The Hollow. Chapter 1. There was a wolf at the gallery door, which meant it must be Thursday, which meant Bryce had to be really goddamn tired if she relied on Danika's comings and goings to figure out what day it was. The heavy metal door to Griffin Antique studded with the impact of the wolf's fist, a fist that Bryce knew ended in metallic purple painted nails, in dire need of a manicure. A heartbeat later, a female voice barked, half muffled through the steel. "Open the hell up, B. It's hot as shit out here." Seated at the desk in the modest gallery showroom, Bryce smirked and pulled up the front door's video feed. Tucking a strand of her wine-red hair behind a pointed ear, she asked into the intercom, "Why are you covered in dirt? You look like you've been rootling through the garbage." "What the fuck does rootling mean?" Danika hopped from foot to foot, sweat gleaming on her brow. She wiped it with a filthy hand, smearing the black liquid splattered there. "You know if you ever picked up a book, Danika." Glad for the break in what had been a morning of tedious research, Bryce smiled as she rose from the desk. With no exterior windows, the gallery's extensive surveillance equipment served as her only warning of who stood beyond its thick walls. Even with her sharp, half-bay hearing, she couldn't make out much beyond the iron door save for the occasional banging fist. The building's unadorned sandstone walls belied the latest tech and grade-A spellwork that kept it operational and preserved many of the books in the archives below. As if merely thinking about the level beneath Bryce's high heels had summoned her, a little voice asked from behind the 6-inch thick archives door to her left. "Is that Danika?" "Yes, Lehaba." Bryce wrapped her hand around the front door's handle. The enchantments on it hummed against her palm, slithering like smoke over her freckled golden skin. She gritted her teeth and withstood it, still unused to the sensation even after a year of working at the gallery. From the other side of the deceptively simple metal door to the archives, Lehaba warned, "Jessica doesn't like her in here." "You don't like her in here," Bryce admitted, her amber eyes narrowing toward the archives door and the tiny fire sprite she knew was hovering just on the other side, eavesdropping, as she always did when someone stood out front. "Go back to work." Lehaba didn't answer, presumably drifting back downstairs to guard the books below. Rolling her eyes, Bryce yanked open the front door, getting a face full of heat so dry it threatened to suck the life from her. And summer had only just begun. Danika didn't just look like she'd been rootling through the garbage. She smelt like it, too. Wisps of her silvery blonde hair, normally a straight silken sheet, curled from her tight, long braid. The streaks of amethyst, sapphire, and rose splattered with some dark, oily substance that reeked of metal and ammonia. "Took you long enough," Danika groused and swaggered into the gallery. The sword strapped at her back, bobbing with each step. Her braid had become tangled in its worn leather hilt as she stopped before the desk. Bryce took the liberty of prying the plait free. She barely untangled it before Danika's slim fingers were buckling the straps that kept the sword sheathed across her worn leather motorcycle jacket. "I need to dump this here for a few hours," she said, pulling the sword off her back and aiming for the supply closet hidden behind a wooden panel across the showroom. Bryce leaned against the lip of the desk and crossed her arms, fingers brushing against the stretchy black fabric of her skin-tight dress. "Your gym bag's already stinking up the place. Jessica's due back later this afternoon. She'll throw your shit in the dumpster again if it's still here." It was a mindless hell Jessica Roca could unleash if provoked. A 400-year-old enchantress who'd been born a witch and defected, Jessica had joined the House of Flame and Shadow, and now answered only to the Underking himself. Flame and Shadow suited her well. She possessed an arsenal of spells to rival any sorcerer or necromancer in the darkest of the houses. She had been known to change people into animals when irritated enough. Bryce had never dared ask if small animals in the dozen tanks and terrariums had always been animals. And Bryce tried never to irritate her. Not that there were many safe sides when the Veneer were involved. Even the least powerful of the Veneer, a group that covered every being on Midgard's side, from humans and ordinary animals, could be deadly. "I'll get it later," Danika promised, pushing on the hidden panel to spring it open. Bryce had warned her 3 times now that the showroom supply closet wasn't her personal locker. Yet Danika always countered that the gallery, located in the heart of the old square, was more centrally located than the Wolf's Den over in Moonwood. And that was that. The supply closet opened, and Danika waved a hand in front of her face. "My gym bag sticking up the place?" With the black boot, she towed the sagging duffel bag that held Bryce's dance gear, currently wedged between the mop and bucket. "When the fuck did you last wash these clothes?" Bryce wrinkled her nose at the reek of old shoes and sweaty clothing that wafted out. "Right. She forgotten to bring home the leotard and tights to wash after a lunchtime class 2 days ago. Mostly thanks to Danika sending her a video of a heap of myth root on their kitchen counter, music already blasting from the beat-up boombox by the windows, along with the command to hurry home quick. Bryce had obeyed. They'd smoked enough that there was a good chance Bryce had still been high yesterday morning when she stumbled into work. There was really no other explanation for why it had taken 10 minutes to type out a 2-sentence email that day. Letter by letter. "Never mind that," Bryce said. "I have a bone to pick with you." Danika rearranged the crap in the closet to make space for her own. "I told you I was sorry I ate your leftover noodles. I'll buy you more tonight." "It's not that, dumbass. Though again, fuck you. That was my lunch for today." Danika chuckled. "This tattoo hurts like hell," Bryce complained. "I can't even lean against my chair." Danika countered in a sing-song voice. "The artist warned you, be sore for a few days." "I was so drunk I spelled my name wrong on the waiver. I'd hardly say I was in a good place to understand what sore meant for a few days meant." Danika, who gotten a matching tattoo of the text now scrolling down Bryce's back, had already healed. One of the benefits to being a full-blooded Veneer. Swift recovery time compared to humans, or a half-human like Bryce. Danika shoved her sword into the mess of the closet. "I promise I'll help you ice your sore back tonight. Just let me take a shower and I'll be out of here in 10. It wasn't unusual for a friend to pop into the gallery, especially on Thursdays, when her morning patrol ended just a few blocks away, but she never used the full bathroom in the archives downstairs. Bryce motioned to the dirt and grease. "What is that on you?" Danika scowled, the angular planes of her face scrunching. "I had to break up a fight between a satyr and a night stalker." She bared her white teeth at the black substance crusting her hands. "Guess which one spewed its juices on me?" Bryce snorted and gestured to the archives door. "Shower's yours. There are some clean clothes in the bottom drawer of the desk down there." Danika's filthy fingers began pulling the handle of the archives door. Her jaw tightened. The older tattoo on her neck, the horned, grinning wolf that served as a sigil for the pack of devils, rippling with tension. Not from the effort, Bryce realized as she noted Danika's stiff back. Bryce glanced to the supply closet, which Danika had not bothered to shut. The sword, famed both in the city and far beyond it, leaned against the push broom and mop, its ancient leather scarab nearly obscured by the full container of gasoline used to fuel the electric generator out back. Bryce had always wondered why Jessica bothered with an old-fashioned generator until the citywide first light outage last week. when the power had failed. Only the generator had kept the mechanical locks in place during the looting that followed, when creeps had rushed in from the meat market, bombarding the gallery's front door with counterspells to break through the enchantments. But Danika ditching the sword in the office, Danika needing to take a shower, her stiff back, Bryce asked, "You've got a meeting with the city heads?" In the 5 years since they met as freshmen at Crescent City University, Bryce could count on one hand the number of times Danika had been called in for a meeting with the 7 people important enough to merit a shower and change of clothes. Even while delivering reports to Danika's grandfather, the prime of the Valbarian wolves, and to Sabine, her mother, Danika usually wore that leather jacket, jeans, and whatever vintage band t-shirt wasn't dirty. Of course, it pissed off to Sabine to no end, but everything about Danika and Bryce pissed off the alpha of the Scythe Moon Pack, chief among the shifter units in the city's auxiliary. It didn't matter that Sabine was the prime apparent of the barbarian wolves and had been her aging father's heir for centuries, or that Danika was officially second in line to the title, not when whispers had swirled for years that Danika should be tapped to be the prime apparent, bypassing her mother. Not when the old wolf had given his granddaughter their family's heirloom sword, after century of promising it to Sabine only upon his death. The blade had called to Danika on her 18th birthday like a howl on a moonlit night. The prime had said, to explain his unexpected decision. Sabine had never forgotten that humiliation, especially when Danika carried the blade nearly everywhere, especially in front of her mother. Danika paused in the gaping archway atop the green-carpeted steps that led down to the archives beneath the gallery, where the true treasure in this place lay, guarded by Lehiba day and night. It was the real reason why Danika, who had been a history major at CCU, liked to drop by so often. Just to browse the ancient art and books, despite Bryce's teasing about her reading habits. Danika turned her caramel eyes, shuddered. "Philip Briggs is being released today." Bryce started. "What?" "They're letting him go on some goddamn technicality. Someone fucked up the paperwork. We're getting the full update in the meeting." She clenched her slim jaw, the glow from the first lights in the glass cones along the stairwell bouncing off her dirty hair. "It's so fucked up." Bryce's stomach churned. The human rebellion remained confined to the northern reaches of Pangaria, the sprawling territory across the Huldran Sea, but Philip Briggs had done his best to bring it over to Valbera. You and the pack busted him right in his little rebel bomb lab, though. Danika tapped her booted foot on the green carpet. Bureaucratic fucking nonsense. It was going to blow up a club. You literally found his blueprints for blowing up the White Raven. As one of the most popular nightclubs in the city, the loss of life would have been catastrophic. Briggs' previous bombings had been smaller, but no less deadly, all designed to trigger a war between the humans and Veneer to match the one raging in Pagaria's colder climes. Briggs made no secret of his goal, a global conflict that would cost the lives of millions on either side. Lives that were expendable if it meant a possibility for humans to overthrow those who oppressed them. The magically gifted and long-lived Veneer, and above them, the Astri, who ruled the planet Midgard from the internal city in Pangaria. But Danika and the pack of devils had stopped the plot. She busted Briggs and his top supporters, all part of the Kira's rebels, and spared innocents from their brand of fanaticism. As one of the most elite shifter units in Crescent City's auxiliary, the pack of devils patrolled the old square, making sure drunken, handsy tourists didn't become drunk, dead tourists when they approached the wrong person, making sure the bars and cafes and music halls and shops stayed safe from whatever lowlife had crawled into the town that day, and making sure people like Briggs were in prison. The 33rd Imperial Legion claimed to do the same, but the angels who made up the fabled ranks of the governor's personal army just glowered and promised hell if challenged. "Believe me," Danika said, stomping down the stairs. "I'm going to make it perfectly fucking clear in this meeting that Briggs' release is unacceptable." She would, even if Danika had to snarl in Micah Domance's face. She'd get her point across. There weren't many who dared piss off the Archangel of Crescent City, but Danika wouldn't hesitate. And given that all 7 heads of the city would be at this meeting, the odds of that happening were high. Things tended to escalate swiftly when they were in the one room. There was little love lost between the 6 lower heads in Crescent City, the metropolis formerly known as Luthanian. Each head controlled a specific part of the city, The Prime Wolves in Moonwood, the Fey Autumn King and 5 Roses, the Under King and the Bone Quarter, the Viper Queen in the Meat Market, the Oracle in the Old Square, the River Queen who very rarely made an appearance, representing the House of Many Waters, and her blue court far beneath the Istros River's turquoise surface. She seldom deigned to leave it. The humans in Apostle Meadows had no head, no seat at the table. Philip Briggs had found more than a few sympathizers because of it. But Micah, head of the Central Business District, ruled over them all. Beyond his city titles, he was Archangel of Valbera, ruler of this entire fucking territory, and answerable only to the 6th Astri in the Internal City, the capital and beating heart of Pangaria, of the entire planet of Midgard. If anyone could keep Briggs in prison, it would be him. Danika reached the bottom of the stairs, so far below that she was cut off from sight by the slope of the ceiling. Bryce lingered in the archway, listening as Danika said, "Hey, Syrinx." A little yip of delight from the 30-pound chimera rose up the stairs. Jessica had purchased the lower creature 2 months ago. To Bryce's delight, he is not a pet, Jessica had warned her. He's an expensive, rare creature bought for the sole purpose of assisting Lehaba in guarding these books. Do not interfere with his duties. Bryce had so far failed to inform Jessica that Syrinx was more interested in eating, sleeping, and getting belly rubs than monitoring the precious books. No matter that her boss might see that at any point, should she bother to check the dozen of camera feeds in the library. Danika drawled, the smirk audible in her voice. "What's got your panties in a twist, Lehaba?" The fire sprite grumbled. "I don't wear panties, or clothes. They don't pair well when you're made of flame, Danika." Danika snickered. Before Bryce could decide whether to go downstairs to referee the match between the fire sprite and the wolf, the phone on the desk began ringing. She had a good idea who it would be. Heels sinking into the plush carpeting, Bryce reached the phone before it went to audio mail, sparing herself a 5-minute lecture. "Hey, Jessica." A beautiful, linting female voice answered. "Please tell Danika Fender that if she continues to use the supply closet as her own personal locker, I will turn her into a lizard." Chapter 2. By the time Danika emerged on the gallery's showroom floor, Bryce had endured a mildly threatening reprimand from Jessica about her ineptitude. One email from a fussy client demanding Bryce expedite the paperwork on the ancient urn she bought so she could show it off to her equally fussy friends at her cocktail party on Monday. And 2 messages from members of Danika's pack inquiring about whether their alpha was about to kill someone over Briggs' release. Natalie, Danika's third, had gotten straight to the point. "Has she lost her shit about Briggs yet?" Connor Holstrom, Danika's second, took a little more care with what he sent out into the ether. There was always a chance of a leak. "Have you spoken to Danika?" was all he asked. Bryce was writing back to Connor, "Yes, I've got it covered," when a gray wolf the size of a small horse pushed the iron archives door shut with a paw, claws clicking on the metal. "You hated my clothes that much?" Bryce asked, rising from her seat. Only Danika's caramel eyes remained the same in this form, and only those eyes softened the pure menace and grace the wolf radiated with each step towards the desk. "I've got them on, don't worry." Long, sharp fangs flashed with each word. Danika cocked her fuzzy ears, taking in the computer that had been shut down, the purse Bryce had set on the desk. "You're coming out with me?" "I've got to do some sleuthing for Jessica." Bryce grabbed the ring of keys that opened doors into various parts of her life. "She's been hounding me about finding Luna's horn again, as if I haven't been trying to find it non-stop for the last week." Danika glanced to one of the visible cameras in the showroom, mounted behind a decapitated statue of a dancing fawn, dating back 10,000 years. Her bushy tail swished once. "Why does she even want it?" Bryce shrugged. "I haven't had the balls to ask." Danika stalked to the front door, careful not to let her claws snag a single thread in the carpet. "I doubt she's going to return it to the temple out of the goodness of her heart." "I have a feeling Jessica will leverage its return to her advantage," Bryce said. They strode onto the quiet street a block off the Istros, the midday sun baking the cobblestones. Danika a solid wall of fur and muscle between Bryce and the curb. The theft of the sacred horn during the power outage had been the biggest news story out of the disaster. Looters had used the cover of darkness to break into Luna's temple and swipe the ancient Fae relic from its resting place atop the lap of a massive, enthroned deity. The Archangel Micah himself had offered a hefty reward for any information regarding his return and promised that the sacrilegious bastard who stolen it would be brought to justice, also known as public crucifixion. Bryce always made a point of not going near the square and the CBD, where they were usually held. On certain days, depending on the wind and heat, the smell of blood and rotting flesh could carry for blocks. Bryce fell into step beside Danika as the massive wolf scanned the street, nostrils sniffing for any hint of a threat. Bryce, as half-fae, could scent people in a greater detail than the average human. She'd entertain her parents endlessly as a kid by describing the scents of everyone in their little mountain town, Nidaros. Humans possessed no such way to interpret the world, but her abilities had nothing on her friends. As Danika scented the street, her tail wagged once, and not from happiness. "Chill," Bryce said. "You'll make your case to the heads, then they'll figure it out." Danika's ears flattened. "It's all fucked, B. All of it." Bryce frowned. "You really mean to tell me that any of the heads want a rebel like Briggs at large? They'll find some technicality and throw his ass right back in jail," she added, because Danika still wouldn't look at her. "There's no way the 33rd's not monitoring his every breath. Briggs so much as blinks wrong, and he'll see what kind of pain angels can rain down on us all. Hell, the government might even send the Umbra Mortis after him. Micah's personal assassin, with the rare gift of lightning in his veins, could eliminate almost any threat." Danika snarled, teeth gleaming. "I can handle Briggs myself." "I know you can. Everyone knows you can, Danika." Danika surveyed the street ahead, glancing past the poster of the 6 enthroned Astri tacked up on a wall, with an empty throne to honor their fallen sister, but loose to breast. She would always have burdens and expectations to shoulder that Bryce would never have to endure, and Bryce was thankful as hell for that privilege. When Bryce fucked up, Jessica usually griped her for a few minutes, and that was that. When Danika fucked up, it was blasted on news reports and across the interweb. Sabine made sure of it. Bryce and Sabine had hated each other from the moment the Alpha had sneered at her only child's improper half-breed roommate the first day at CCU, and Bryce had loved Danika from the moment her new roommate had offered her a hand in greeting anyway. And then Sabine was just pissy because she'd been hoping for a muscle-bound vampire to drool over. Danika rarely let the opinions of others, especially Sabine, eat away her swagger and joy. Yet on rough days like this, Bryce lifted a hand and ran it down Danika's muscled ribs, a comforting sweeping stroke. "Will come after you or the pack?" Bryce asked, her stomach twisting. Danika hadn't busted Briggs alone. He had a score to settle with all of them. Danika's snout wrinkled. "I don't know." The words echoed between them. In hand-to-hand combat, Briggs would never survive against Danika, but one of those bombs would change everything. If Danika had made the drop into immortality, she'd probably survive. But since she hadn't, since she was the only one of the pack of devils who hadn't yet done it, Bryce's mouth turned dry. "Be careful," Bryce said quietly. "I will," Danika said, her warm eyes still full of shadows. But then she tossed her head as if shaking it free of water, the movement purely canine. Bryce often marveled at this, that Danika could clear away her fears or at least bury them enough to move onward. Indeed, Danika changed the subject. "Your brother will be at the meeting today." "Half-brother." Bryce didn't bother to correct her. "Half-brother and full Fae prick." "And?" "Just thought I'd warn you that I'll be seeing him." The wolf's face softened slightly. "He's going to ask me how you're doing." "Tell Rune I'm busy doing important shit and go to hell." Danika huffed and laughed. "Where exactly are you doing this sleuthing for the horn?" "The temple," Bryce said with a sigh. "Honestly, I've been looking into this thing for days on end and can't figure out anything. No suspects, no murmurings at the meat market about it being for sale, no motive for who would even bother with it. It's famous enough that whoever's got it has it wrapped up tight." She frowned at the clear sky. "I almost wonder if the power outage was tied to it. If someone shut down the city's grid to steal it in the chaos. There are about 20 people in the city capable of being that crafty, and half of them possess the resources to pull it off. Danika's tail twitched. If they're able to do something like that, I suggest staying away. Lead Jessica around a bit, make her think you're looking for it, and then let it drop. Either the horn will show up by then, or she'll move on to her next stupid quest. Bryce admitted, It'd be good to find the horn, for my own career. Wherever the hell that would be. A year of working at the gallery hadn't sparked anything beyond disgust at the obscene amounts of money that rich people squandered on old-ass shit. Danika's eyes flickered. Yeah, I know. Bryce zipped a tiny golden pendant, a knot of 3 entwined circles, along the delicate chain around her neck. Danika went on patrol, armed with claws, a sword, and guns, but Bryce's daily armor consisted solely of this, an artisan amulet, barely the size of her thumbnail, gifted by Jezebel on the first day of work. A hazmat suit and a necklace. Danika had marveled when Bryce had shown off the amulet's considerable protections against the influence of various magical objects. Artisan amulets didn't come cheap, but Bryce didn't bother to delude herself into thinking her boss's gift was given out of anything but self-interest. It would have been an insurance nightmare if Bryce didn't have one. Danika nodded to the necklace. Don't take that off, especially if you're looking into shit like the horn. Even though the horn's mighty powers had long been dead, if it had been stolen by someone powerful, she'd need every magical defense against them. Yeah, Bryce said, though Danika was right. She'd never taken the necklace off since getting it. If Jessica ever kicked her to the curb, she knew she'd have to find some way to make sure the necklace came with her. Danika had said as much several times, unable to stop that alpha wolf's instinct to protect at all costs. It was part of why Bryce loved her, and why her chest tightened in that moment with that same love and gratitude. Bryce's phone buzzed in her purse, and she fished that out. Danika peered over, noted who was calling, and wagged her tail, ears perking up. Do not say a word about Briggs, Bryce warned and accepted the call. Hi, Mom. Hey, sweetie. Ember Quinlan's clear voice filled her ear, drawing a smile from Bryce even with 300 miles between them. I wanted to double check that next weekend is still okay to visit. Hi, Mommy. Danika barked toward the phone. Ember laughed. Ember had always been Mom to Danika, even from their first meeting, and Ember, who had never borne any children beyond Bryce, had been more than glad to find herself with the second, equally willful and troublesome daughter. Danika's with you? Bryce rolled her eyes and held out the phone to her friend. Between one step and the next, Danika shifted into a flash of light, the massive wolf shrinking into the lithe, humanoid form. Snatching the phone from Bryce, Danika pinned it between her ear and shoulder as she adjusted the white silk blouse Bryce had loaned her, tucking it into her stained jeans. She managed to wipe a good amount of the Night Stalker gunk off both the pants and leather jacket, but the t-shirt had apparently been a lost cause. Danika said into the phone, Bryce and I are taking a walk. With Bryce's arched ears, she could hear her mother perfectly as she said, Where? Ember Quinlan made overprotectiveness a competitive sport. Moving here to Lithuanian had been a test of wills. Ember had only relented when she learned who Bryce's freshman year roommate was, and then gave Danika a lecture on how to make sure Bryce stayed safe. Randall, Bryce's stepfather, had mercifully cut his wife off after 30 minutes. Bryce knows how to defend herself, Randall had reminded Ember. We saw to that, and Bryce will keep up her training while she's here, won't she? Bryce certainly had. She hit up the gun range just a few days ago, going through the motions Randall, her true father, as far as she was concerned, had taught her childhood. Assembling a gun, taking aim at a target, controlling her breathing. Most days, she found guns to be brutal, killing machines, and felt grateful that they were highly regulated by the Republic. But, given that she had little more to defend herself beyond speed and a few well-placed maneuvers, she learned that for a human, a gun could mean the difference between life and slaughter. Danika fibbed. We're just heading to one of the hawker stalls in the old square. We wanted some lamb kofta. Before Ember could continue the interrogation, Danika added, Hey, B, must have forgotten to tell you that we're actually heading down to Calico's next weekend. Ethan's got a sunball game there, and we're all going to cheer him on. A half-truth. The game was happening, but there had been no discussion of going to watch Connor's younger brother, CCU star player. This afternoon, the pack of devils was actually heading over to the CCU arena to cheer for Ethan. But Bryce and Danika hadn't bothered to attend an away game since sophomore year, when Danika had been sleeping with one of the defensemen. "That's too bad," Ember said. Bryce could practically hear the frown in her mother's tone. "We were really looking forward to it." Burning soulless. This woman was a master of the guilt trip. Bryce cringed and snatched back at the phone. "So were we, but let's reschedule for next month." "But that's so long from the..." "Shit, a client's coming down the street," Bryce lied. "I gotta go. Bryce Adelaide Quinlan. Bye, Mom." "Bye, Mom," Danika echoed just as Bryce hung up. Bryce sighed toward the sky, ignoring the angels soaring and flapping past her, shadows dancing over the sun-washed streets. Message incoming in 3, 2... Her phone buzzed. Ember had written, "If I didn't know better, I think you were avoiding us, Bryce. Your father will be very hurt." Danika let out a whistle. "Oh, she's good." Bryce groaned. "I'm not letting them come to the city if Briggs is running free." Danika's smile faded. "I know. We'll keep pushing them off until it's sorted out." Thank Donna for Danika. She always had a plan for everything. Bryce slid her phone into her purse, leaving her mother's message unanswered. When they reached the gate at the heart of the old square, its quartz archway as clear as a frozen pond, the sun was just hitting its upper edge, refracting and casting small rainbows against one of the buildings flanking it. On summer solstice, when the sun lined up perfectly with the gate, it filled the entire square with rainbows, so many that it was like walking inside a diamond. Tourists milled about, a line of them snaking across the square itself, all waiting for the chance at a photo with the 20-foot-high landmark. One of 7 in the city, all carved from enormous blocks of quartz hewn from the Laconian mountains to the north. The old square gate was often called the Heart Gate, thanks to its location in the dead center of Luthanian, with the other 6 gates located in equidistance from it, each one opening onto a road out of the walled city. "They should make a special access lane for residents to cross the square," Bryce muttered as they edged around tourists and hawkers. "And give tourists fines for slow walking," Danika muttered back, but flashed a lupine grin at a young human couple that recognized her, gawked, and began snapping photos. "I wonder what they think if they knew the Night Stalker's special sauce is all over you," Bryce murmured. Danika elbowed her. "Asshole." She threw a friendly wave to the tourists and continued on. On the other side of the Heart Gate, amid a small army of vendors selling food and touristy crap, a second line of people waited to access the golden blocks sticking out of its southern side. "We'll have to cut through them to get across," Bryce said, scowling at the tourists idling in the willing heat. But Danika halted, her angular face turned to the gate and the plaque. "Let's make a wish." "I'm not waiting in that line." Usually, they just shouted their wishes drunkenly into the ether late at night when they were staggering home from the White Wyvern and the square was empty. Bryce checked the time on her phone. "Don't you have to get over to the Continuum?" The governor's 5-towered stronghold was at least a 15-minute walk away. "I've got time," Danika said, and grabbed Bryce's hand, tugging her through the crowds and toward the real tourist draw of the gate. Jutting out of the quartz about 4 feet off the ground lay the dial pad, a solid gold block embedded with 7 different gems, each for a different quarter of the city, the insignia of each district etched beneath it. Emerald and a rose for 5 roses, opal and a pair of wings for the CBD, ruby and a heart for the old square, sapphire and an oak tree for Moonwood, amethyst and a human hand for apostle metals, tiger's eye and a serpent for the meat market, an onyx so black it gobbled the light, and a set of skull and crossbones for the bone quarter. Beneath the arc of stones and etched emblems, a small, round disc rose up slightly, its metal worn down by countless hands and paws and fins and other manner of limb. Sign beside it read, "Touch at your own risk. Do not use between sundown and sunrise. Violators will be fined." The people in line waiting for access to the disc seemed to have no problem with the risks. A pair of giggling teenage male shifters, some kind of feline form from their sense, goaded each other forward, elbowing and taunting, daring the other to touch the disc. "Pathetic," Danika said, striding past the line, the ropes, and a bored-looking city guard. a young fey female, to the very front. She fished a badge from inside her leather coat and flashed it at the guard, who stiffened as she realized who cut the line. She didn't even look at the golden emblem of the crescent moon bow with an arrow knocked through it before stepping back. Official Auk business, Danika declared with the unnervingly straight face. It'll be just a minute. Bryce stifled her laughter, well aware of the glares fixed on their backs from the line. Danika drawled to the teenage boys. If you're not going to do it, then clear off. They whirled toward her and went white as death. Danika smiled, showing nearly all her teeth. It wasn't a pleasant sight. Holy shit, whispered one of them. Bryce hid her smile as well, and never got old. The awe. Mostly because she knew Danika had earned it. Every damn day. Danika earned the awe that bloomed across the faces of strangers when they spotted her corn silk hair and that neck tattoo, and the fear that made the lowlives in the city think twice before fucking with her and the pack of devils. Except for Philip Briggs. Bryce sent a prayer to Ogenia's blue depths that the sea goddess would whisper her wisdom to Briggs to keep his distance from Danika if he ever really did walk free. The boys stepped aside, and it only took a few milliseconds for them to notice Bryce too. The awe on their faces turned to blatant interest. Bryce snorted. Keep dreaming. One of them stammered, turning his attention from Bryce to Danika. My history teacher said the gates were originally communication devices. I bet you get all the ladies with those stellar factoids, Danika said without looking back at them, unimpressed and uninterested. Message received. They slunk back to the line. Bryce smirked and stepped up to her friend's side, peering down at the dial pad. The teenager was right, though. The 7 gates of the city, each set along a ley line running through Luthanian, have been designed as a quick way for the guards in the districts to speak to each other centuries ago. When someone merely placed a hand against the golden disc in the center of the pad and spoke, the wielder's voice would travel to the other gates, a gem lighting up with the district from which the voice originated. Of course, it required a drop of magic to do so, literally sucked it like a vampire from the veins of the person who touched the pad. A tickling zap of power, gone forever. Bryce raised her eyes to the bronze plaque above her head. The court's gates were memorials, though she didn't know for which conflict or war, but each bore the same plaque. The power shall always belong to those who give their lives to the city. Considering it was a statement that could be constructed as being in opposition to the Asri's rule, Bryce was always surprised that they allowed the gates to continue to stand. But after becoming obsolete with the advent of phones, the gates have found a second life when kids and tourists began using them, having their friends go to the other gates in the city so they could whisper dirty words or marvel at the sheer nobility of such an adequate method of communication. Not surprisingly, come weekends, drunk assholes, a category to which Bryce and Danika firmly belonged, became such a pain in the ass with their shouting through the gates that the city had insinuated hours of operation. And then dumb superstition grew, claiming the gate could make wishes come true, and that to give over a droplet of your power was to make an offering to the 5 gods. It was bullshit. Bryce knew, but if it made Danika not dread Briggs' release so much, well, it was worth it. What are you going to wish for? Bryce asked when Danika stared at the disc. Gems dark above it. Emerald Forfiro lit up, a young female voice coming through to shriek, "Titties!" People laughed around them, the sound like water tickling over stone, and Bryce chuckled. But Danika's face had gone solemn. I've got too many things to wish for, she said. Before Bryce could ask, Danika shrugged. But I think I'll wish for Ethan to win his sunball game tonight. With that, she set her palm onto the disc. Bryce watched as her friend let out a shiver and quietly laughed, stepping back. Her caramel eyes shone. Your turn. You know I have barely any magic worth taking. But okay. Bryce said, not to be outdone, even by an alpha wolf. From the moment Bryce walked into her dorm room freshman year, they'd done everything together. Just the two of them, as it always would be. They even planned to make the drop together, to freeze into immortality at the same breath, with members of the pack of devils anchoring them. Technically, it wasn't true immortality. The veneer did age and die, either of natural causes or other methods. But the aging process was so slowed after the drop that, depending on one species, it could take centuries to show a wrinkle. The Fae could last 1,000 years. The shifters and witches usually 5 centuries. The angels somewhere between. Full humans did not make the drop, as they bore no magic. And compared to humans, with their ordinary lifespans and slow healing, the veneer were essentially immortal. Some species bore children who didn't even enter maturity until they were in their 80s, and most were very, very hard to kill. But Bryce had rarely thought about where she fall on that spectrum. Whether her half-Fae heritage would grant her 100 years or 1,000, it didn't matter, so long as Danika was there for it all. Starting with the drop. They take the deadly plunge into the matured power together, encounter whatever lay at the bottom of their souls, and then race back up to life before the lack of oxygen rendered them brain dead, or just plain dead. Yet, while Bryce would inherit barely enough power to do cool party tricks, Danika was expected to claim a sea of power that would put her ranking far past Sabine's, likely equal to that of Fae royalty, maybe even beyond the Autumn King himself. It was unheard of for a shifter to have the sort of power, yet all the standard childhood tests had confirmed it. Once Danika dropped, she'd become a considerable power among the wolves, the likes of which had not been seen since the elder days across the sea. Danika wouldn't just become the pride of the Crescent City wolves. No, she had the potential to be the alpha of all wolves on the fucking planet. Danika never seemed to give two shits about it. Didn't plan for a future based on it. 27 was the ideal age to make the drop. They decided together, after years of mercilessly judging the various immortals who marked their lives by centuries and millennia, right before any permanent lines or wrinkles or gray hairs. They merely said to anyone who inquired, "What's the point of being immortal badasses if we have sagging tit, vain assholes?" Fairy had hissed when they explained it the first time. Fairy, who made the drop at age 21, hadn't chosen the age for herself. It just happened, or had been forced upon her. They didn't know for sure. Fairy's attendance at CCU had only been a front for a mission. Most of her time was spent doing truly fucked up things for disgusting amounts of money over in Pangera. She made it a point never to give details. "Assassin," Danika claimed. Even Sweet Juniper, the fawn who occupied the four sides of the little friendship square, admitted the odds were that Fury was a merc. Whether Fury was occasionally employed by the Astri and their puppet Imperial Senate was up for debate too. But none of them really cared. Not when Fury always had their back when they needed it, and even when they didn't. Bryce's hand hovered over the golden disc. Danika's gaze was a cool weight on her. "Come on, B. Don't be a wimp." Bryce sighed and set her hand on the pad. "I wish Danika would get a manicure. Her nails look like shit." Lightning zapped through her, a slight vacuuming around her belly button, and then Danika was laughing, shoving her. "You fucking dick." Bryce slung an arm around Danika's shoulder. "You deserved it." Danika thanked the security guard who beamed at the attention and ignored the tourists still snapping photos. They didn't speak until they reached the northern edge of the square, where Danika would head toward the angel-filled skies and towers of the CBD to the sprawling continuum complex in its heart, and Bryce toward Luna's temple, 3 blocks up. Danika jerked her chin toward the streets behind Bryce. "I'll see you at home, all right? Be careful." Bryce blew out a breath, trying to shake her unease. "I know how to look out for myself, B," Danika said, but love shone in her eyes, gratitude that crushed Bryce's chest, merely for the fact that someone cared whether she lived or died. Sabine was a piece of shit, had never whispered or hinted who Danika's father might be, so Danika had grown up with absolutely no one except her grandfather, who was too old and withdrawn to spare Danika from her mother's cruelty. Bryce inclined her head toward the CBD. "Good luck. Don't piss off too many people." "You know I will," Danika said, with a grin that didn't meet her eyes. Alright, here's a quick recap of what happens in chapters 1 and 2. We're introduced to Bryce Quinlan, our protagonist, and her best friend Danika Fender. Bryce works at Griffin Antiques, a gallery dealing in magical objects, and Danika is the alpha of the Pack of Devils, a group of elite werewolves. The two of them have an incredibly close bond, and we immediately see how much they mean to each other. The first chapter is all about setting the tone. Crescent City is a vibrant but dangerous place where humans and supernatural beings coexist, not always peacefully. We see Bryce and Danika out on the town enjoying life, and it's clear they're living in the moment. In Chapter 2, the stakes begin to rise. We get hints about Danika's responsibilities as alpha and the pressures she faces. Meanwhile, Bryce is dealing with her own complicated family dynamics, particularly her strained relationship with her Fae father. Despite all this, the chapters feel lighthearted, like the calm before the storm. Let's talk about Bryce first. From the moment we meet her, it's clear she's tough, confident, and a little bit reckless. But there's also a vulnerability to her. She's juggling the challenges of being half human in a world dominated by supernatural beings. What did you think about her introduction? Then there's Danika. She's fierce, loyal, and deeply protective of Bryce. Their friendship feels so real, and it's one of the emotional anchors of these early chapters. Maas does an incredible job of making us care about their bond right away. So, let's also talk about the world building. Crescent City feels alive. It's got magic, yes, but also modern conveniences like cell phones and nightclubs. The combination of the fantastical and everyday makes the world feel both extraordinary and relatable. What about you? Did any details about the setting or character stand out? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Send them my way. Now, let's take a closer look at one of the key themes introduced in these chapters. Freedom versus responsibility. Bryce and Danika are both navigating the expectations placed on them. Bryce is constantly reminded of her half-human status and struggles to carve out her own identity. Danika, as alpha, has immense responsibilities to her pack, and you can sense how much that weighs on her. These themes are subtle here, but they'll become even more important as the story unfolds. What do you think? Do you see echoes of this theme in their actions and choices so far? Alright, time for a quick creative break. One of my favorite descriptions in these chapters is when Maas describes Crescent City's old square. When they reach the gate at the heart of the old square, its quartz archway as clear as a frozen pond, the sun was just sitting its upper edge, refracting and casting small rainbows against one of the buildings flanking it. On summer solstice, when the sun lined up perfectly with the gate, it filled the entire square with rainbows, so many that it was like walking inside a diamond. Now, here's a fun challenge. If you could create a shop in Crescent City, what would it sell? Would it be a bakery with enchanted pastries? A bookstore where the books whisper secrets? Let me know your ideas, and I'll share some in the next episode. For next week, we'll be reading chapters 3 through 5. This is where the story really starts to pick up, and I can't wait to talk about it with you. Here's what to watch for. How does Bryce's relationship with Danika evolve? What clues do we get about the darker forces at play in Crescent City? As always, I'd love to hear from you. Send me your thoughts, theories, or favorite moments, and I'll feature some in the next episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this first episode of Books, Blankets, and Brews. If you'd enjoyed it, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your book-loving friends. You can also find me on Facebook at Books, Blankets, and Brews, or email me at booksblanketsandbrews@gmail.com. Your feedback and participation make this podcast even better. Next week, we'll dive deeper into Bryce's story and uncover some of the secrets that Crescent City is hiding. Until then, happy reading!